Welcome to the Restituto Orbis channel, and today we're going to be exploring death shrines, or the concept of the ossuary. And as we fly over this very famous and well-known ossuary in France that commemorates the Battle of Verdun, the meat grinder battle from World War I, where over 100,000 French and German soldiers met their untimely demise, we think of the fact that there seems to be a lot of respect that's given towards the interment of these remains of all these unfortunate soldiers who died in these infinite frontal assaults that occurred for an entire year. And yet there's more of a story behind these ossuaries, and an ossuary is simply a structure where bones are stored, and we'd like to think that bones are stored in a very respectful manner. And indeed, as we look at this World War I monument, ossuary, cemetery, we can see that the greatest respect is given to soldiers who died in battle. And yet, I use the concept of ossuaries as evidence for our reset theory, the reset war that occurred between the 4th and 5th era and our 5 eras theory. Now, the intention of this exploration is to show that hard evidence, and believe me, there is hard evidence to be seen. And we'll start at Kutna Hora in the Czech Republic, population 21,417. Rather modest population, especially when we've considered how populations have exploded in certain places, such as Seattle, where we had over 200,000% growth in a 100-year period. So it's quite amazing to see a town or small city in the Czech Republic where there's only 21,000 people and not 5 billion or 5 trillion. And I'm being serious. It's in this very modest town, though, that we're going to come across our first ossuary. And it's simply a chapel where bones are stored. And in this town, we even have another one of these very intriguing plague columns, because we just can't get enough of these plague columns. Again, another interesting reminder of what we have, that we supposedly survived a terrifying plague, so we decided to build a monument or memorial to it, and it's a column. There's even a smaller one that's closer to our building or chapel of interest here in this small city in the Czech Republic. What do these always truly reflect, though? We always see so many interesting figures and different symbols on these plague columns, and we've seen those symbols before. Now we go to Sedlic Ossuary, which is in the town in the Czech Republic, where we're going to take a close look. Now, we're told that this is a chapel where remains have been stored. Now, historically, and I'm going to avoid a lot of the historical narrative because, quite frankly, I find it very absurd for all these locations we're looking at in this exploration, we're told that this was a highly desirable burial plot for people to be buried in the years from medieval times all the way until the present in the Czech Republic, or whatever nation or organization of empire it originally was. And the official story does tell us here that the reason that they have so many bodies in this particular little chapel is this was a highly desirable burial plot. So what they were doing is they would remove or exhume the bodies that were already buried there and simply pile up the bones in great bone pyramids. Well, eventually they brought along this individual, a gentleman by the name of F. Rindt. We don't really need to concern ourselves with his name because his biography is so shallow it's not even funny, and we can see that even these arrangement of bones here is very unfortunately and shabbily done. But when you look deeper in the structure, you can see that 40 to 70,000 sets of bones have been arranged in a very artistic manner, and supposedly Mr. Rindt, or whoever he really was the individual who was hired fortuitously in the 1800s to arrange these pyramid piles of bones in a very artistic format to decorate this chapel in a very macabre or macabre manner, whether you're using American or British English. Yes, I always find pronunciations funny. Now consider this. Why would this ever be acceptable? How could it have ever been acceptable for bodies to have been exhumed? And they even have a legend that it was a half-blind monk who went about the task of exhuming all these bodies, these 40 to 70,000 bodies. How could the church ever accept exhuming bodies? And then furthermore, how could anyone ever accept arranging these skulls in this very macabre display? There's something awfully disturbing about all this when we look at all these bones and the way they're arranged. Now, of course, we won't think twice of it because this is a very popular tourist attraction in the Czech Republic. It's a very unique site. Now, if you look past the bones, you can see some very elaborate architecture within this little chapel. And now you can see how it's been decorated in this very disturbing manner. Are we really to believe that this one individual in this one location did this? And perhaps you might be thinking this is simply something that happened in one random location and that this is not widespread. Who in their right mind would decorate a location with these bones in this very disturbing manner? Because as we can see, this is really a display. And what are you doing with a display of human bones? Well, many people have this, those who are into hunting, and I'm not judging people who are into hunting in this exploration, I'm just using it as an example. We display these things to show trophies, to show achievements. Now, of course, the historical account tells us that this was merely a work of art to do something with all these bones instead of actually, burying them, as we'd like to think the major religions of our land tell us to. And yet we find them arranged in this very bizarre format. I don't know, it makes you wonder if this is where Alejandro Jodorowsky and the designers had for their aborted Dune movie in the 1970s when they were going to design House Harkonnen. And then, of course, H.R. Giger. You can see where a lot of nightmarish inspirations may have come from looking at these rooms and these locations in this so-called ossuary in the Czech Republic. Now, you might be surprised to know that this is most certainly not a one-off location. There are many locations across the land where we have the bones displayed in this very disturbing manner. Now, a lot of people say, Aurelian, you're simply being a killjoy. Why can't you just enjoy the artistic depiction of human bones? Because when I look at these bones, if these bones are indeed real, which we're assured that they are, and when I actually went to this location many years ago, the bones looked and seemed pretty real to me. I remember that every single set of bones, and is it really 40 to 70,000, or is it many more individuals? Every single set of bones did used to be a human being at one point in time. And so I remember that, and I consider that, and I find that very odd that it would ever be acceptable to any sort of society or religion, no matter what the time frame, to arrange the bones in these very disturbing formats. To show these bones as some sort of disturbing work of art. And in a Catholic chapel, no less. At least that's what the official story tells us. And how could it have ever been acceptable to have all of these bones exhumed from their rightful burial plot, just because we're told that everybody else wanted to be buried there, and so they respected the wishes of the people who were going to be currently buried there? And of course the answer will be, it's simple economics. The church needed money, and therefore they accepted their money. You look at this building, though, and you can see that on the outside it does have some interesting touches of architecture, and certainly on the inside it does as well, but what was the original purpose behind the structure? And we've explored this concept before in one of the very early explorations on the channel with the arrangement of bones in the underworld horror concept. And what are we really looking at? I believe that we're looking at trophy displays. This is something to remind us that a group of people in the past were completely destroyed, annihilated, and this is all that's left of them. Their bones, arranged in a trophy formation representing works of art. It is disturbing, and at the same time, I believe it's also disgusting to a great extent that this is allowed to persist. Now, would I go and visit this site and actually look at this? Sure, but I would also remember the fact that every single one of those skulls that you're looking at right now used to be a living human being. And we always have that age-old question, well, what about respecting the dead? What about respecting our cemeteries? How exactly is this showing respect? How exactly is a very disturbing sight like this to be accepted and tolerated in a society that's always telling us that we need to right wrongs and address injustices, and yet this is allowed to persist, and no one thinks twice of this. And you can see that as you look deeper within this structure, there are more elaborate arrangements. And I will say that whoever did arrange the skulls and the bones, they did put a lot of effort into it. And there's even a lot of effort that's being put into cleaning them and maintaining this sacred site. Indeed, Ewan McGregor and his friend Charlie Borman in Long Way Round actually visited this site. I had no idea that these two were good friends. Apparently they did numerous series such as this where they went riding on their motorcycles together. Would have thought that this is a place that they would visit. And I show this with image generation just to give you an idea of when you try to fit in factors and variables for describing a location such as the ossuary, this is what you come up with. It's very dark and depressing and very ominous and malevolent all at the same time. Now let's go to the Chapel of Bones in Portugal just to show you that there's not an isolated location. And once again on the exterior we see a very well-developed structure with some portal windows and small pediments and classic decorations and very elaborate towers. Now of course the name says it all. What are we going to see in this one? And yet you can see that in the exterior they've put a lot of effort into the architecture. And Portugal always draws our attention for its very elaborate and well-constructed and designed buildings that completely defy the limitations of the time, and let's not forget we saw one of the most intact and complete star forts. And yet in this very aptly named Chapel of Bones, we have another very macabre, going British English this time, depiction of skulls that are all arranged in some sort of format. Again, reflecting what? Is this just supposed to be a collection of bones that's supposed to show our respect for all these unfortunate individuals? And again, I wonder how many individuals' bone sets are actually in this particular structure. Thousands, tens of thousands? I mean, we could guess, we could try to count, but I have a feeling that nobody has any idea how many actual bone sets are located in this chapel of bones. And once again, I pose the question, why is this even considered tolerable? Oh, and this little saying here saying that, yes, we're waiting for your bones, so come see the bones that are here now. Isn't that ominous in and of itself? Imagine you walk into this structure and you're not even terrified or concerned that perhaps one day it'll be your bones on display in a structure like this. But of course, that's not the way we're supposed to think. We're just supposed to think that these were structures that were erected in the distant past, and even though there may be some terrifying depictions within them, this is merely to remind us that we all have mortality, and you should not be alarmed at the fact that we have bones that are displayed in a very unique way that seems to suggest some sort of trophy or great victory. And that's why I think that's a very disturbing aspect with all these different structures that we look at. Now, to be fair, there are certain structures, we'll look at one later, where we're told that that's indeed what they were. It was supposed to be a structure of victory. But it's very strange to me that these are official religious sites, and yet we have all these bones arranged in this manner. Again, thinking of all the effort that this took. This seems to depict some sort of warning, some sort of triumph, and never forget your mortality and never forget the fact that this could happen to you one day, once you passed away. Now, normally I don't go down this dark line of thinking, but when I see structures such as this and the fact that these are still standing to this day, and of course they're great tourist attractions, I have to pose those questions. I'm not someone who's just going to walk by this and say, look, there's a big pile of bones there. When are they going to film the next Dungeons & Dragons movie there? We can see Jeremy Irons chew up the scenery as there's bones of real human beings behind him. And yes, in that lovely movie, that is actually something that happened, although we're not going to hold that against Jeremy Irons. Apparently he had a house to pay for, so that's why he appeared in that movie. But on a more serious note, you can see in this particular chapel just how all these bones have been painstakingly arranged in the walls and the columns, and looking more closely at these unfortunate skulls that have actually been amalgamated into the wall. A wall of skulls. It's something that we'd expect to see in a horror film. Something that we'd expect to see that would convey terror in human beings along with a very ominous score. And yet not too far from the structure, you can find other great beautiful structures in Portugal, as we alluded to earlier, with very advanced architecture, and we're not too far from that beautiful star fort that we looked at that also had a similarly named star fort when we explored Mobile Bay. Now let's go to Skull Chapel in Poland. Well, isn't this interesting, looking at the exterior of this Skull Chapel in Poland, and, well, I guess I can say there's nothing to see here. So let's take another look at it. It's a very modest building on the outside, and just looking at it from this perspective, you probably wouldn't think too much of it. I mean, why would there be anything unique about this particular structure? Why would it actually get your attention if you're just going around Poland? And Poland is a very beautiful nation, as many are, but then you go on the inside and you can see the bizarre, macabre arrangement of skulls, bones, and yet done in an artistic format around a crucifix, no less. So what exactly is being conveyed here? Why do we have this strange fixation on depicting and displaying human remains in this way? We're taught that the major religions of the land now value the proper treatment of the dead, and even the older religions or belief systems involved immolation, or cremation as it were, although that's considered barbaric by some standards. Of course, any sort of thing can be considered barbaric, and what's really the meaning of that word? I'm not going to follow that one down, but when you look at these different structures and you consider how these skulls are depicted, you have to ask these questions because, again, there was a lot of effort that went into arranging all these bones and all these skulls to look like this. And I find it even more disturbing that this is done in buildings that we're told are religious. So again, this gives us more conflicting accounts. Do we have actual spiritual beliefs where we truly value the welfare of human beings? Or is that just something that we say and then we do something else, which is something we come across every day? And of course, you'll probably say, well, it's just a normal contradiction because that's how human beings are. Yes, human beings are supposed to reflect their spiritual strength, but then they're supposed to be reminded of their material mortality. And therefore, depicting bones like this in a painstaking manner, and just imagine all the effort that went into this, and even more strange, having all these bones arranged around these angelic figures. It's almost the true contradiction that you see in some of these structures. And yet I suspect that these structures remain, and keep in mind we've looked at catacombs before, and we will be looking at catacombs here in a little bit, but these are all structures that are above ground. And these are all chapels and ossuaries and what have you that are depicting bones in this way as a warning, as a reminder, as what happened to those who obviously were not to persist. Now let's go to the Paris Catacombs, where we have the remains of 6 million people. This is one of the many entryways, and you can see that there's a lot of unique aspects to Paris. Yes, we have Paris on the exploration list coming up pretty soon. And the catacombs of Paris are supposedly well documented and mapped, although I suspect that we probably haven't seen 5 to 10% of everything that's actually mapped. Who knows how extensive a lot of these catacombs actually are. But the Paris catacombs are extremely well known, and yet when you actually go around the catacombs, you see many bizarre displays within them. Odd models and odd mock-ups of strange structures. For some reason, this one reminds me of the structure at the end of the film The Ninth Gate, if you ever saw that one with Johnny Depp. And here we see the same arrangement of all these skulls and bones. Now keep in mind, we're informed that there's 6 million individuals whose sets of bones line these catacombs in Paris. But I wonder if that's not a vast underestimation of the actual number of bones. And yet you see other displays such as this that give you the impression there's something else going on in these catacombs, that there's some sort of very bizarre and horrific tale that's being conveyed. It's not just the arrangement of the bones, but it's almost as though this is a reminder of a previous civilization that was completely destroyed, and that every single individual in that civilization, we are now looking at their remains. At least those whose remains actually survive to this day, because if we look at some of the forces that we saw that were clearly applied on other remaining structures and what they did to them, we have to wonder what those same forces would have done to human bones. Would there even be anything left, or would it just simply be completely reduced to dust, or even less? And yet here in these Paris catacombs, you can see these strange arrangements of skulls and bones, and consider all the effort and time that was put into this. And of course we'll have the usual hand-wave story that it was monks and it was members of the church trying to be respectful to all of these deceased individuals by arranging their bones in a format, and in a nice format and a pattern around a cross, such as we see in this image, because that's just completely normal. And indeed, all of us are certainly guilty, and yes, I'll use that word directly, of going around on trips, and I've done it myself. I'm not above it, and I'm not going to judge anybody else, but guilty of simply going through sites like this and not being fully aware of the implications of it. What does it really mean when you're going across bones like this? Now, we have some people, such as Native Americans, who are very expressive about how they respect their tombs, and we can certainly respect that. Yet in these catacombs in Paris, we supposedly have strange figures such as this, with this individual who seems to be passing through the wall. What exactly is this all about? Let me know what you think in the comments. But back to the topic of actual consideration for the dead, how can we say we have any consideration for them when we just simply walk through these catacombs and we treat it as a tourist attraction? Or we're on our motorcycle riding with our best friend and we stop in the Czech Republic to take a look at these arrangement of bones. Quick, pose for your picture, smile. Never mind the fact that you're lined up to 100, 200 people whose lives are not remembered. And I also find that rather disturbing when people want to tell me that our explorations don't respect the original builders of the buildings that we look at. But then those same people are all about gallivanting around these piles of bones and not thinking twice of it. And that's probably the most disturbing aspect of it all, because, again, that's not necessarily something that you can hold individuals directly accountable for if they're not aware, because we have a society that says, yes, it's perfectly okay to go walking amongst these bones and posing with them for pictures and make sure that they're kept clean and they're kept in their proper formats and arrangements to show their artistic appeal. I'm just going to be very honest. I find the whole concept of bones being depicted like this for artistic appeal disturbing beyond the ability of words to convey. And I find it more disturbing that we continue to use these Paris catacombs as a tourist attraction and these other ossuaries that we've looked at as a tourist attraction. Let's take a look at Skull Tower in Serbia. Now, this is one of the bone monuments, or ossuaries as you will, that was originally supposedly constructed as a warning when the Ottomans had defeated a rebellious force of Serbians in the distant past, or whoever they were actually fighting, and the rebellious force decided not to surrender to the inevitable, and they allowed themselves to all be killed. So since they couldn't be impaled, as was the tradition at the time, the Ottoman commander simply decided to have their bones put in this rather bizarre tower. If that is indeed what happened, although I sincerely question all these accounts, because if they were already dead, what is this going to show and what's this going to prove? It's really strange. It seems to be yet another structure that matches the other structures that we've looked at, where once again we have skulls on display to remind us of human mortality, and it's also a very bizarre display that we could really say is simply a trophy. And that's really what I think we're looking at with all these ossuaries, these towers, these chapels. We're looking at a true commemoration of what remained of the previous civilization. We are looking at their remains in every single one of these. And maybe that's why it's more disturbing to me beyond any reason, is because these were once human beings that were probably the part, or at least the end, of a great civilization. And now their bones are displayed as trophies, a reminder of a civilization that was destroyed. Now, whether it destroyed itself or it was destroyed by external forces, or, as I suspect, a combination of both, it's very unfortunate that this is what's remembered of them. Because we can certainly determine that in our current society, if any other certain group of people that was defeated in a conflict in the past, anything from the 20th century, and they had their bones depicted like this, there would be quite a response to it. At least we'd like to think there would be. But I suppose for a lot of people, it's just what they're told to value and what they're told to be upset or concerned about in the day, in the moment. Because it's always interesting to me just how fluid it really is. And yet you can see and get the almost lifelike and disturbing quality just looking at these skulls. And who were these people exactly? And is this kept as a reminder to us to stay in line? Because just as we saw in the little chapel in Portugal, if you're not careful, it could be your bones in a wall someday. And you're not supposed to forget that. Now, I know it's probably one of the most darkest and morbid thoughts that I've had since having the channel, at least since doing underground horror, but I really don't know any other way to convey this. I believe that these displays are definitive evidence of the remnants of the Reset War. They're victory trophies. Now, there are other catacombs that may have other victory trophies around every major city across the land, even some questionable catacombs in the United States. And if you'd like me to explore them, let me know. Please like, comment, and subscribe.